Happy anniversary.
Dan, my husband, he's an amazing dad.
Down.
This is crazy.
Oh my God, we're going to Vegas! Woo!
Call in everybody.
Escaped that life and now they found us.
I'm not playing. This is my life. Hey.
I'm kind of into spontaneous.
Mwah! The record.
The film starts with Dan, a top salesman at a used car dealership in Buffalo, New York. He's great at selling cars and known as the best on the team.
It is never too late to become the man that you've always wanted to be.
One day, his boss asked him to take a picture for the company website, but Dan declined because he wanted to celebrate his wedding anniversary with his wife, Jessica. Dan is a hardworking guy who organizes his life carefully, even keeping a schedule at home. When he arrived home, he greeted Jessica and their 3 kids, Nina, Kyle, and Max.
Happy anniversary.
Oh, baby, you remembered.
Jessica was in the middle of a disagreement with Nina about her college choice. Nina had planned to attend Stanford University for journalism, but she changed her mind and decided to go to Southern Iowa University with her boyfriend, Trevor. Jessica then asked Dan to talk to Nina, but Nina stood firm in her decision. Dan wanted to take Jessica out for their 18th wedding anniversary, so he asked Kyle to watch Max. But Kyle had other plans and refused, passing the responsibility to his older sister, Nina, who wasn't too happy about it. Eventually, Nina felt better when she thought about attending the same college as Trevor. Meanwhile, Kyle met up with his friend Samir. Instead of doing their group work, they were playing online games in Samir's garage after Kyle paid him some money. Kyle, known online as Killboy, is actually a well-known gamer with a huge fan following.
Your boy's back, baby. All right, here we go.
Now, back to Dan and Jessica, who went to an amusement park. Jessica felt a little annoyed with Dan because he always stuck to his usual plans, while she wanted him to plan a family trip out of town. After enjoying a few rides together, Dan promised to plan that family vacation. Jessica was thrilled with the idea, and as she and Dan shared a kiss, a group of teenage boys at the amusement park snapped photos and teased them. Dan noticed and asked the boys to delete the photos, but one of them spilled his drink on Dan's head. Rather than arguing, Dan walked away from the situation. The next day, Jessica practiced boxing to relieve her frustrations as a stay-at-home mom dealing with various challenges, including difficulties in guiding her daughter, Nina. During her session, she accidentally hit another woman named Gwen, who was also boxing. Jessica apologized, explaining that she was frustrated because her husband never invited the family on holidays or spent time with them outside the home. After chatting for a while, Gwen had to head to the airport for her job as a tour guide. She handed Jessica her business card, offering to help her with vacation plans anytime. Dan was shopping at the supermarket with Max when a stranger suddenly attacked him. He quickly defended himself, surprising everyone around. Acting as if nothing happened, he paid for his groceries and went home, where he kept a secret stash of weapons under the stairs. Feeling worried, he called his friend Audie to arrange new identities for him and his family. Later, he arrived at Nina's school and went to the school magazine editor's room to find her, but she wasn't there. A student told him that Nina had quit the school magazine 3 months earlier and was now hanging out with friends under the stadium. Dan found Nina there and expressed his disappointment that she hadn't told him about leaving the magazine. Upset, Nina explained she quit because her dad never read her articles. Dan then asked her to come with him.
How could you do that? You work so hard to become editor.
You don't even read my stuff.
And when he went to pick up Kyle from his chess class, he discovered that Kyle was playing online games at Samir's garage. Dan scolded Kyle and told him to get in the car. Once all his kids were inside, he quickly drove to pick up Jessica, who worked at the hospital. He announced they were heading to Las Vegas for a vacation, something Jessica had always wanted. Meanwhile, a black van started following them. When Dan noticed, he tried to shake off the van, speeding up without mentioning it to his family. He drove to his workplace's showroom, lifted the car, and found a listening device attached underneath. Secretly, Dan placed the device on a car his coworker was about to test. He then suggested his coworker drive the test car at high speed to diagnose a problem. The people in the black van, thinking they were still following Dan, chased after his co-worker's car instead. Once things calmed down, Dan continued their trip to Las Vegas. When Jessica was about to share photos of their trip, Dan gathered all the cell phones they had and threw them under a bridge. He didn't want any communication devices during the holiday, as he was worried about people tracking them. At the American Automobile Association office, Dan tried to get a map for their trip. The officer of the office was hesitant because Dan didn't want to pay with a credit card. However, he gave the officer some cash as a bribe, and the officer finally provided them with the maps they needed. Soon after, they continued their journey, even though it was a bit awkward at first because they were used to being busy with their gadgets. But soon they all started singing and laughing together to make the trip more enjoyable.
Pretty impressive, huh?
Back at Dan's house, a man named McCaffrey and his 3 men were trying to find Dan's family. It wasn't easy because there was no record of their credit card usage or any social media posts from Dan's family. McCaffrey quickly ordered his men to keep searching for Dan's family, suspecting that Dan hadn't revealed his true identity. While staying at a hotel, Dan changed his mind about staying after seeing Kyle post a photo with a fan on social media. He told his family to keep moving, so his wife and kids had to sleep in the car that night. Soon, 3 of McCaffrey's men on motorcycles began chasing Dan's car. Dan turned up the music to keep his family from realizing what was happening. Max, the baby, stayed awake and laughed, as if he knew his dad could handle the situation. Suddenly, one of McCaffrey's men tried to shoot at Dan, and Dan fired back, hitting him. Another man got close and grabbed onto the car, but Dan knocked him out by shoving Max's milk bottle into his helmet, which sent him tumbling onto the road. Finally, Dan dealt with the last pursuer by crashing his car into the criminal's motorcycle, sending him crashing into a billboard. Jessica heard an explosion and woke up, but Dan told her it was just a pothole. Having driven all night, Dan decided to stop at a plantation for some rest. Just as he was about to fall asleep, Nina woke up and noticed they were in Yawa. She asked her dad to take her to Southern Yawa University, where she wanted to go. After some arguing with Jessica, Dan finally agreed to take her to campus. While walking through the campus park with Kyle and Max, Nina listened as Kyle mentioned that the family seemed uneasy about her relationship with Trevor, who had changed. Kyle admitted he missed the old Nina, who was closer to the family. Touched by his words, Nina smiled and thanked her younger brother for caring so much. Meanwhile, Dan listened to Jessica as she shared memories of her past as a pole vaulter and the dream she had to give up after a leg injury. Dan wanted to share his own story, but held back when he noticed a suspicious man with a suitcase nearby. Dan approached a man on campus who turned out to be a German corn seed businessman searching for his daughter. As they passed a laboratory, Dan grew suspicious of the man's story, so he tested him by speaking in German to confirm he wasn't one of McCaffrey's men. Jessica was surprised to hear her husband speaking German and left the hallway.
Auf Wiedersehen, mein Schatz.
When the man opened a suitcase full of corn seeds, Dan believed him. Suddenly, one of McCaffrey's men tried to shoot Dan, who quickly ducked into the lab, where a fight broke out. Dan overpowered McCaffrey's men. Meanwhile, Nina stayed at her school dorms and accidentally walked into Trevor's room, only to find him with another girl. Shocked and hurt, she decided to teach Trevor a lesson by breaking up with him. Later, Nina joined Dan's family on a trip to Las Vegas. When they reached Colorado, Nina took over the driving seat from her dad. She apologized to Dan for leaving her school magazine behind and promised to regain her role as the magazine editor. She thanked him for not telling Jessica about it. The next day, after a night in Colorado, Dan contacted Audie and arranged to meet in Las Vegas to retrieve his family's passports. While sitting at a restaurant, Dan planned to tell Jessica about his past, but Kyle interrupted to talk about why he enjoyed being an online gamer. Kyle explained that he lacked confidence in real life, but felt happy playing games as Killboy, where many people admired him. He also tried to prove to his dad that gaming required intelligence and quick reflexes. Kyle then challenged Dan to a laser shooting game, with the condition that if he won, Dan couldn't stop him from gaming. If he lost, he'd quit. Hearing this, Dan agreed, and they headed to the laser shooting game area. Kyle had no idea that Dan was skilled with weapons, and Dan easily won the game. This made Kyle feel sad, but Dan tried to cheer him up with a hug. When Dan and his family arrived in Las Vegas, they went to their hotel room. Dan then met Augie at the bar to get their new passports and flight tickets to Vancouver. Later, Dan returned to the room to prepare for dinner with Jessica, making sure to have some weapons just in case. Before leaving, he told his kids not to leave the room or open the door for anyone.
You do not open that door for anyone. You got it? Got it.
However, Kyle, Nina, and Max sneaked out to explore the hotel's online gaming area. Meanwhile, one of McCaffrey's men spotted Dan and his family in Las Vegas and reported it to his boss. Back in the gaming area, Kyle met a professional gamer named Run, who invited him to meet other gamers at a restaurant. Dan tried to tell Jessica about his past, but when the waiter spoke in French, he accidentally replied in French. Jessica couldn't understand him, but praised him anyway. Meanwhile, Kyle was preparing to play an online game after Rin asked him to take his place, so Rin could talk to Nina. Unknown to them, McCaffrey's men watched from a distance. After finishing dinner, Jessica and Dan returned to the hotel, unaware that their child was missing from their room. At the same time, some of McCaffrey's men entered the room to attack Dan. Using his skills, Dan managed to subdue 2 of the intruders, but quickly lowered his weapon. When McCaffrey's subordinate, Coogan, held Jessica hostage, Dan saw an opportunity and threw a knife that struck Coogan in the eye, freeing Jessica. Jessica then rushed to her children's room and found that Nina and the others had left. She searched for them in an online gaming place while scolding Dan for hiding something, saying she didn't want to see him again. Meanwhile, Kyle won the online game match and became the MVP. Soon after, Jessica and Dan arrived at the gaming area to pick up Kyle and the others. Once they were in a safe place, Dan revealed his past as a secret killer who escaped from his group to live as an ordinary citizen. Since then, McCaffrey and his men had pursued him to eliminate him. When Kyle and Nina heard the story, they burst into laughter until gunshots rang out. Dan quickly told his family to take cover in a casino. He tried to take down McCaffrey's men, but his shots couldn't harm them because they wore bulletproof vests. Dan continued to distract McCaffrey's men and eventually defeated them. After that, he confessed to his family that his real name was Sam. Sam served in the military, and McCaffrey recruited him for a special mission to eliminate criminals beyond the law's reach. However, Sam soon realized McCaffrey was using him to kill people for a high fee, so he decided to escape.
My father was prone to violence. When I turned 18, it was straight into the army.
McCaffrey was a father figure. I trusted him, but I was naive. I mean, it started out legit.
McCaffrey then began to hunt him down. To protect his family, Sam provided them with new identity passports. However, Kyle and Nina were upset, believing Sam had ruined their lives. Jessica, feeling angry and deceived after 18 years of marriage, contacted Gwen to plan a vacation away from Las Vegas. When Jessica and her children met Gwen, they were surprised to find she had arranged a private jet for them. On the plane, Gwen shared a story about her ex-husband from Buffalo, who married someone else. Jessica became suspicious that Gwen was talking about Sam. When they arrived at their destination, Jessica planned to go with her children. Suddenly, McCaffrey confronted them. Gwen had trapped Sam's family to hand them over to McCaffrey in exchange for getting Sam back. McCaffrey then took Jessica and her children hostage to force Sam to meet him alone at a casino. Soon after, McCaffrey contacted Sam and threatened to harm his family if he didn't follow his orders. When Dan reached the casino, McCaffrey's men used a drone to watch for his arrival. Inside the casino, Dan met a man named Spiros, who led him to the room where McCaffrey held his family captive. Once inside, McCaffrey welcomed Dan, and during their conversation, the family learned that McCaffrey was Dan's biological father. He felt disappointed because Dan had left him several years ago. McCaffrey then asked Dan to return as his top assassin, but Dan refused, prompting McCaffrey to order Gwen to shoot Jessica. Fearing for his family's safety, Dan agreed to follow his father's wishes if McCaffrey ensured his wife and children returned safely to Buffalo. McCaffrey agreed, and Spiros invited Jessica and the others to leave the room. In the elevator, Jessica cleverly used Max's diaper to distract Spiros and pushed him off the top floor. They hurried back to rescue Dan. Inside the room, Dan pretended to love Gwen and ends up making her unconscious, allowing his family to escape. Meanwhile, McCaffrey sensed something was off and ordered his men to prepare. Dan told Jessica and the children to go to the roof and give the drone to Kyle, who would help monitor McCaffrey's men. However, when McCaffrey's men waited by the elevator to capture Dan and his family, they only found Max's equipment inside. When they checked it, a bomb exploded, catching them off guard. Dan defeated McCaffrey's men one by one with Kyle's help, who pointed out their locations. Meanwhile, Gwen woke up and McCaffrey called her, ordering her to find Kyle, who was operating the drone. Dan aimed his gun at McCaffrey from upstairs and told his father to stop everything. But McCaffrey ordered his men to shoot at Dan, and he dodged their shots. On the roof, Jessica told her children to hide and confronted Gwen, who had made her way up there. In the game room, Dan struggled to read the opponent's moves after McCaffrey shot down Kyle's drone. Back on the roof, Gwen easily overpowered Jessica and intended to harm Kyle and the others. Jessica tried to climb to the top floor using a bamboo pole, but it broke and Gwen laughed at her. Soon after, Jessica grabbed a broken piece of bamboo and threw it at Gwen, causing her death. Back with Dan, he faced McCaffrey. Just before McCaffrey could shoot him, Nina arrived with the others and called McCaffrey her grandfather, asking him to stop. This distracted McCaffrey and gave Dan the chance to attack him. Nina did this to buy Dan more time to survive. In the end, they imprisoned McCaffrey for his various crimes. Nina achieved her dream of becoming a news reporter. Dan opened a security advisory company for banks, and Jessica became an athletic trainer at a school. In their free time, Dan's family went on road trips together, with a rule that no one could use cell phones during the trips. They all enjoyed every moment of their family outings. The moral lesson from the film is to never forget to pack diapers because they might just save your life and help you defeat bad guys. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe and press the bell icon for more amazing videos. See you next time.